The marshes and beaches here in the Camargue are one of France's natural wonders, but they're also under threat from rising sea levels. Welcome to this week's Environment programme, where that's exactly what we're going to be talking about. You can see that this beach is now just a finger of sand, and more of it disappears every year. In fact, the outlook's bleak. Scientists say that by 2030, the sea will have risen by up to 23 centimetres. Such a rapidly rising problem certainly needs rapid solutions. So just how do we deal with rising sea levels? Here's what's coming up in this week's programme. Southern France under threat. The Camargue and its marshlands could have disappeared entirely by 2100, with the town of Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer cut off on a peninsula. Are man-made solutions just making things worse? We've been finding out. Paying the price. In developing countries, governments find rising sea levels a costly challenge to face. Their only solution: move entire villages further away from the shore. We'll have a report on that from the Ivory Coast. Plus, a new way of life. If you're living with the threat of flooding because of rising sea levels, why not live on top of the water? We take a look at the countries building artificial islands. Here in Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer in the Camargue, you can see the Mediterranean. But for years and years now, it's been getting closer and closer. Many fear that this little town could one day become an island, or at best, a peninsula surrounded by the waves. For people here, rising sea levels aren't a worry for the future. They're a reality right now. It's a picture postcard scene, but although it looks serene, this landscape is under threat. In Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer, the sea is rising several millimetres a year, and it's eating away at the beach. François Sabatier is a geographer who's been observing this coastline for years now. He says these artificial dunes are getting smaller. You can tell just by taking a few steps.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You see, it's now around 20 metres, and when we created the dunes we had 80 metres of beach. This part of the beach is disappearing by around 1 to 3 metres each year. And things aren't looking much better for the future. Scientists predict that the waters are set to rise much faster than in the past. The sea here in the Camargue is estimated to be rising by 2 millimetres per year. But in future, oceanographers and climate scientists think that will get 3, 4 or 5 times faster. And erosion linked to rising sea levels will get much worse.
A repeat of this is what people in the Camargue really fear. Water everywhere, in houses, fields and streets. This was 1982, when floods left 10,000 people homeless and cut off the roads and electricity. Since then, the authorities have brought out the big guns, rocky sea walls to stop the sea coming any closer. Each one costs several million euros, and there are around 100 of them.
In Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer, if we hadn't built these dikes, the shoreline would have been around 2 kilometres into the village now. We think the village would have been swallowed up by the waves around the year 2000.
These fishermen have plenty to say on the matter. The rising water levels can also be felt out on the open sea.
When it comes to the fish, we have seen changes. Our job is no longer the same, and there's been an evolution in the sea too.
For the moment, it's worrying, but not dramatic.
It may not be dramatic, but under the very eyes of its famous pink flamingos, the Camargue is sinking. The two arms of the river have been dammed, meaning the sediment is no longer deposited on the plains and the delta isn't naturally raised anymore. Eric Coulet is the director of the Camargue National Park, 140,000 hectares of marshy terrain, which he's been tramping across for years.
We're driving along the Vacarès Marsh, the centrepiece of the Camargue National Park. It's a very important area, absolutely key. It plays a pivotal role between the salt water of the sea and the fresh water of the Rhône, and between Northern Europe and Africa.
Eric takes us to look at the park's sea dike, built to stop the encroaching waters. Here it's no longer a case of the river flowing into the sea, but the other way round. And the resulting influx of salt water is endangering the park's flora and fauna.
If you're, say, a river fish and you get engulfed by the seawater, you're not going to last very long. It totally changes your life, doesn't it? 15 minutes later and you're stuck. So it's that whole system, the birds, the water, aquatic plants, etc. The whole thing is being taken over by the sea.
Conquering the sea is no easy matter, and the future of the Camargue hangs in the balance as a result. It's dependent not only on the water, but on the weather. As storms get stronger and more frequent, so it becomes ever more likely that Sainte-Marie-de-la-Mer will become the Mont Saint-Michel of the Mediterranean. Flamingos like these ones behind me are a famous symbol of the Camargue, but for how much longer? The special islands where they build their nests are being destroyed by the very dikes that have been built to protect this area from rising sea levels. It's another example of the complex problems that arise from those rising waters, but at least the government here has the means of paying for solutions. What happens in developing countries where there simply aren't the resources to deal with rising sea levels in the same way? Well, we're going to take a trip now to Ivory Coast in Africa, where much of the western shoreline is being nibbled away at by the sea. People there have simply no choice but to move further inland. This report now from Grand Laou.
Seawater eating away at the Ivorian coast, devastating large swathes of the village of Grand Laou. Because of global warming, the sea level's rising, picking up sand and carrying it inland. Many local fishermen's homes have gone, washed away by the rising waters.
That night I noticed the waves coming in, and I only had time to escape with my family. I could only look on at the destruction.
Grand Laou on the Atlantic coast is disappearing bit by bit. Situated between the ocean and the lagoon, the village was once one of Côte d'Ivoire's major trading posts during the colonial era. Now authorities have moved businesses and public services to another town, but the village chief doesn't agree with the decision.
Laou used to be the economic capital of Côte d'Ivoire. Today, it's all gone for purely political reasons.
A former capital and holidaymakers' hotspot, Grand Bassam lies on the other side of the Ivorian coast. Today, its colonial-era architecture is also under threat. Here, inhabitants build dikes to delay the sea's advance. Yet many historic buildings are in dire need of renovation, prompting the Ivorian government to seek outside help. Earlier this month, Grand Bassam won recognition from UNESCO as a World Heritage Site.
So what if, faced with rising sea levels, we were to live instead on top of the water? Here in Paris, space is tight and every square centimetre can be used. And that's why some people are now choosing to live on barges, a bit like this one. Vincent, you've lived on this barge for 20 years now, haven't you? And flooding really isn't a worry for you, is it?
No, it's not a problem. As you know, the boats are floating, so they move up and down depending on the water level.
And you've lived through at least one or two floods while you've been here in Paris. What's that like?
There aren't any problems. If the water levels rise, we adjust our moorings and we all help each other.
Well, it is possible to take that idea even further. As well as living on floating boats, it's also now possible to live in floating houses or even on floating islands. We're going to take a look at how, faced with global warming, architects are coming up with futuristic ideas for living space.
Boats used to run alongside this canal, but recently they've been replaced by houses. This resident sold his home in town to come and live on the canal. With his 132 square meter house, the owner feels he's got a good deal.
This is the living room. This is the living room, the outside area, of course. Downstairs, you actually stand below water level. This is the water level. So below this is water. If you make a hole in the wall here, the water would come in. So we won't do that.
It looks like a luxurious concept, yet here in the Netherlands, living on water has become a necessity. 1/3 of the land is below sea level and prone to flooding. These houses are one way to deal with the problem. They're built on wooden hulls, not on concrete foundations. When the water rises, the house rises with it.
And when it's dry, we are a bit lower. It can vary 0.5 meter, sometimes a little bit more, but we remain afloat.
Since people are this enthusiastic in the Netherlands, this architect is thinking of exporting the concept to France. He believes it's a way to adjust to climate change.
Continuing to build our classic homes is ridiculous and dangerous. If we don't evolve, we'll risk the same destruction and costs we've had to face in the past.
Other architects have gone a few steps further. They're planning the construction of artificial islands which would float next to the land where the residents used to live.
Our civilization needs to find new territories to live in. The Earth is the blue planet. It's covered with water. So I think it's time to find new living habits in symbiosis with nature. There's also so much we can use and discover in the sea.
Up to 50,000 people could potentially live in this floating town, but it will cost at least 1.5 billion euros to build. So for the moment, investors are hesitant, and it seems futuristic projects like this might have to wait a bit longer to see the light of day.
Well, as we've just seen, rising sea levels can provide something of an inspiration for architects. And so let's end this week's programme on some rather fantastical images, courtesy of Olivier Campagne and the Arte Factory Lab. They've imagined what Paris might look like if it were entirely submerged by water. From the Quai Malaquais to the Louvre Pyramid, taking in the Pompidou Centre and the Tuileries, these images are a surrealist glimpse at what could, who knows, one day be a reality. And that's it for this week's edition. Thanks very much for watching, and do stay with us here on France 24.